Welcome to the debate. Today we're delving into a controversy that really remains as potent now as it was a century ago. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, KV62, back in 1922. The incredible preservation, the sheer wealth, epitomized by that iconic gold mask, it often distracts us from the complex and ethically fraught historical circumstances surrounding the excavation itself.
Indeed. And it's impossible to discuss the foundation of 20th century Egyptology without addressing this monumental finding. But we also have to acknowledge that it occurred within a system of colonial patronage, and that led to some deeply questionable methods and ethical failures that have fundamentally shaped our modern understanding of the past.
Right. So our central question today really concerns the enduring ethical legacy of that initial discovery. Was Howard Carter's excavation fundamentally a reckless, colonially tainted pursuit of treasure that ended up compromising the historical record? Or was it a monumental, successful act of historical retrieval that provided indispensable evidence, despite the methodological limitations of the era?
I'll be arguing that the methodological destruction inflicted on the primary evidence, coupled with documented ethical breaches, fundamentally compromises the project's claim to historical integrity. The zeal for gold and notoriety, it just clearly superseded careful science.
And I will be taking the position that the sheer scale of the excavation success, the retrieval and securing of unprecedented artifacts against the threat of permanent loss, that it ultimately outweighs the methodological flaws that were just inherent to archaeology in the 1920s. It provided a bedrock for modern scholarship that is, unmatched.
Look, I understand the necessity of securing the site. I do. Had KV62 remained undiscovered, the treasures might have been permanently lost to looting, which was just rampant in the Valley of the Kings. However, when we view the excavation through a contemporary ethical and scientific lens, the priority was clearly skewed. Yes, they found the gold, but they prioritized that dazzling wealth over the historical integrity and, frankly, the dignity of the deceased ruler. This just demonstrates a failure of preservation at the most critical moment.
And I'll acknowledge that instantly. 20th century archaeology operated under a profoundly different ethical framework, especially concerning human remains. But we cannot diminish the magnitude of what the expedition secured. The retrieval of an intact 18th dynasty royal tomb, complete with the entire funerary context. It's unparalleled globally. This retrieval secured a massive historical foundation that has allowed for a century of subsequent research that ranges from DNA analysis on parentage to, high-resolution CT scans of the body. Without Carter's team securing those objects, none of that later, more rigorous science could have happened.
But you can't isolate the success of the retrieval from the damage. The reality is that the team inflicted destructive, unnecessary measures upon the mummy itself. I'm referring specifically to the use of heated knives, the severing of the limbs and the head, and the truly shocking action of leaving the body in the blazing Egyptian sun, just hoping to melt the hardened resin that had cemented the body to the coffin. This reckless, brutal handling destroyed the body's physical integrity. It drastically complicated every single subsequent attempt at scientific and forensic study.
That's a fair point, and the methods were. They were undeniably crude. But I would frame the physical reality a bit differently. The body was encased not merely in hardened resin, but in an immense amount of ritualistic unguents and black pitch that was poured over the burial during the final rites. This material had set like concrete, binding the body irrevocably to the inner coffin. So, to catalog the thousands of unique, vital gold artifacts, from the mask to all that jewelry, which were integral to understanding the king's wealth, his status, and religious beliefs, the body had to be freed. The decision, though brutal, was made to recover the entire historical context, and that included accessing those unique layers.
The mummy was the historical context. When a modern forensic anthropologist looks at the remains of Tutankhamun, they see evidence that was needlessly mutilated in the pursuit of shiny objects. The severing of the skull, for example, it complicated all the initial attempts to determine cause of death, contributing to decades of false theories, including that initial murder theory fueled by a loose bone fragment. Had the body been treated as the primary evidence rather than an obstruction to the treasure, subsequent CT scans and analysis wouldn't have had to overcome the artifacts of the excavation itself. We know he suffered from malaria and curler disease. We know he was frail, using the 130 walking canes found in the tomb. But the biological data itself was compromised by the very people who were meant to preserve it.
But the very fact that we possess the walking canes and that we know about his physical frailty is a testament to the retrieval process, a process which, though imperfect, secured those artifacts and that contextual data. The constraints of 1920s conservation technology meant they faced an impossible choice: either leave the mummy encased and lose the data provided by the immense ritualistic trappings, or apply destructive means to secure the context of the wealth. They chose the latter, and I would argue, rightly so, to secure the physical, tangible, historical record of the burial rite.
But the argument has to extend beyond the physical damage. We have to address the ethical framework of the entire endeavor, which leads us squarely into accountability and professional ethics.
Absolutely. Let's address Carter's proven theft of artifacts, the discovery of amulets and small treasures identical to items cataloged from the tomb found in his private residence after his death. It confirms the suspicion that personal gain was a strong, persistent motivator, and that is a fundamental violation of the archaeological code. Every find belongs to the historical record, not the excavator's private collection.
Exactly.
I will concede that Carter's personal ethical lapse regarding the stolen amulets is inexcusable. It casts a long shadow, but we have to assess whether that personal failing invalidates the entirety of the multi-year, meticulously documented process. The excavation yielded over 5,000 unique items. Carter's personal collection, while confirming his poor character, was minuscule in comparison.
I would argue that the scale of the theft is less relevant than the motive it establishes. It suggests a pattern of prioritizing private interest over public trust, which is then further reflected in the very nature of KV-62. The tomb is unusually small and cramped for an 18th dynasty pharaoh. We know from the burial chamber paintings that they exhibit evidence of microbial growth on the walls. This is a critical technical detail, that microbial growth happens when a tomb is sealed before the plaster and paint have time to fully dry. This suggests a chaotic, rushed sealing, perhaps a desperate transition of power after the king's sudden death, with officials just scrambling to secure the wealth. Carter was working in an environment already defined by a rush to secure treasure, and his own actions simply reflect that chaotic, wealth-focused environment.
But the hasty nature of the tomb, possibly repurposed from a lesser noble, that only underscores the incredible historical fragility of the find and the immediate necessity of the expedition. His sudden, youthful death created a historical vacuum, and the expedition, whatever its flaws, secured the tangible evidence that filled that vacuum. It's a testament to the organizational genius of the team that despite the chaos and the unprecedented scale of the find, they successfully inventoried and moved to overwhelming bulk of the material, establishing a chain of custody that has lasted a century.
I'm not convinced that focusing on meticulous inventorying excuses the systemic ethical breaches that were just inherent in the financial and political structure of the excavation itself. And this brings us to the issue of media control and colonial exploitation.
Right.
Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer, sold exclusive media rights to the Times of London. This wasn't just a matter of managing funding, this was an explicit political act of exclusion.
I agree that the political optics were terrible. The arrangement locked out local Egyptian journalists, forcing the Egyptian people to read about the discovery of their own heritage, a deeply national cultural moment, in a foreign British press. It was a clear act of exclusion that fueled the growing anti-colonial nationalist sentiment of the 1920s.
Exactly. It became a profound political flashpoint. It reinforced the narrative that this discovery was a foreign triumph, and it ignored the contribution of the local laborers, including the 12-year-old boy Hussein Abdul Rasul, who actually made the initial discovery of the steps down to the tomb. His role was systematically minimized, while the Western figures reaped all the credit and controlled the narrative. That is the definition of colonial exploitation in this context.
I see why you feel that way, and the unfairness regarding the local credit is undeniable. However, the financial and logistical resources provided by Carnarvon were the critical, non-local components that made the discovery possible in the first place, ensuring the multi-year funding stream that this complex excavation demanded. And regarding the exclusive media deal, I would frame that as a pragmatic, necessary response to an overwhelming, dangerous global frenzy. This wasn't a local field dig. This was a media storm unlike anything the world had ever seen. That deal was an attempt to manage the immense global demand for news, to ensure a stable, documented source of information, and most importantly, to guarantee the consistent, secure funding needed for the complex, time-consuming conservation work that had to follow the opening of the tomb.
Pragmatism doesn't excuse exclusion, particularly when it directly exacerbates political tensions during a period of rising Egyptian nationalism. That decision turned the entire scientific undertaking into a political symbol of foreign domination.
But let's consider how oversight and methodological failures function across different eras. If we are critiquing the ethics and methodology of the 1920s, we have to examine contemporary oversight failures too. The past century has given the artifacts to the Egyptian authorities and conservationists, yet serious mistakes persist. I am thinking specifically of the 2014 incident. Museum staff operating under modern protocols and sophisticated national oversight, they accidentally snapped off the famous mask's beard. And how did they attempt to fix a priceless 3,000-year-old artifact? They used industrial epoxy glue. They scratched the gold surface in the process. It took German and Egyptian experts weeks to carefully undo that damage. I raise this not to excuse Carter's actions, but to illustrate a crucial point. Technical incompetence and poor judgment are not unique to the colonial era. Even contemporary sophisticated oversight can fail dramatically. The mistakes of the 1920s, while brutal, were rooted in a fundamental lack of specialized knowledge. The 2014 incident was just purely reckless negligence under ideal circumstances.
That 2014 incident was certainly a profound failure of conservation protocol, I agree, but it was an isolated incident of poor judgment by a few individuals acting outside established rules. Carter's destruction of the mummy, the systematic exclusion of the Egyptian press, and his own theft were foundational to the entire multi-year excavation project. They were systemic, not incidental errors. Carter set the tone for the entire enterprise, establishing a precedent where an artifact's market value seemed to hold greater sway than its scientific integrity or its national dignity.
And that is precisely the tension we have to hold, the foundation-laying success and the regrettable, documented systemic failures. The complexity of the find forced immediate, imperfect decisions. I just don't think we can judge 1922 practices against 2022 standards. The sheer volume of material required a triage approach.
And I believe we must prioritize the ethical failures over the eventual success, because those failures fundamentally compromise the physical evidence. When you choose to destroy the pharaoh's body in pursuit of jewelry, you sacrifice the integrity of the historical moment.
As we conclude, I want to reiterate my core position. While we absolutely must critique the methods of the 1920s through a modern, educated lens, the retrieval of KV-62 established the very foundation of modern Egyptology regarding the 18th dynasty. The historical light shed by the artifacts is undeniable. We can engage in sophisticated analysis today about issues like the debate over his parentage, the delicate ambiguity surrounding the roles of Nefertiti, Kia, and the younger lady, and the persistent theories about his mysterious death, only because that evidence was secured a century ago. The historical significance of the retrieval, for me, outweighs the failures of the execution.
And I maintain that the excavation was fundamentally compromised by ethical transgressions that continue to shape the historical narrative. The damage done to the primary material, the mummy, and the narrative integrity, through theft and the exclusion of local scientific contributions, it means that the controversies surrounding Tutankhamun are far from settled. Every time those treasures tour the globe, the legal and ethical disputes over their ownership and handling resurface, proving that the cost of retrieval, paid in compromised integrity, is still being tallied today.
And the story of Tutankhamun continues to engage us precisely because of these enduring complexities and the very human decisions that shaped its unveiling.
We have to continue to examine the human errors and the political agendas that shape this discovery, weighing the cost of retrieval against the undeniable value of the treasure secured for the historical record.
An excellent exchange, as always.